Give Ed Salisbury the podium.
Thank you, Don. Thank each and every one of you for the opportunity to be here with you. What I'd like to do is to share my own experiences of near-death and transformational experiences in a way that we can all recognize that we all have a similar opportunity to know and to experience the grace and the wisdom of our Creator. And so I would hope that in, say, 50 minutes or so, I can give you a little insight into what my experiences have been. And I'm happy to say I have a truth keeper and part of my partner and wife, Cheryl, who will raise her hand should I get off path. And while I'm thinking of it, Don acknowledged that symposium that was put on called Wisdom of the Near-Death Experiencers. And I want to acknowledge Matt DeBow and Dave Drapella, who were very instrumental as well in making that a success. Before I jump into what it was like for me, I should maybe give you a little bit background of where I'm coming from. And the fact of the matter is that I was the firstborn of 3 children from a happily married couple from New England. I had a childhood in Panama Canal Zone, youth in Texas, off in the military, back to college in Texas, off in industry, back to Texas for more college, and back and forth and back and forth. It was an exciting time to seek what is really true about life and about God. Starting out, I was an altar boy, paper delivery in the mornings, and a Boy Scout, Explorer Scout. I was always wanting to explore. Exploring what's across the river, what's the reason people come together. But more than that, where do we come from? And I remember very distinctly walking out under the stars as a young child, and it was almost like E.T. I wanted, come get me, take me home, I don't belong here. Now, for a show of hands, anyone else here have that kind of a feeling in their life? We are not alone. I think that is an insight to the fact that we realize that we are more than just this physical body in this moment in time. Growing up, I went off, as I said, to the military, came back, finished college, went off and worked in corporate America. And at 26 years of age, I was driving home in my Firebird convertible when I crashed my car into a tree. And I died. And that was the first of many mystical near-death and spiritual experiences. Because there are so many of them, and I don't know what fits in, I'm going to use this intuitively. But Cheryl has prepared for me to share. So in my life, continuing as a scout, trying to find my way through life, I first had an auto wreck where I destroyed my body in a car wreck. That was my classic, and I'll go into detail that shortly. Shortly after, I married the woman of my dreams, and living in Houston on top of the world, she drowned. Now, this brings to point spiritually transformative experiences happen not always because things are great. Sometimes they happen because they're tragedies. And these experiences transform how we relate with our life, our world, and our body. And to this end, that death of my wife changed my life dramatically. Even though I'd had a near-death experience and knew that we lived beyond, losing her was heartbreaking. It wasn't long after that that I myself had a drowning experience. And in that drowning experience, I left my body, floated into the heavens, met my granddad, and even my wife, and came back. From that auto wreck, in 5 years, I went through 7 major surgeries. Being powerless, being strapped into a gurney and heading back to surgery time and again, can bring one to a point of realizing, I'm powerless, there must be a force keeps bringing me back. When I came back from the drowning, I ended up in the operating table here in Austin and had a classic floating over the body, looking down at my body, seeing myself looking at myself. That's one we can talk about as well. Following that surgery, I was looking for some kind of way to restore health and vitality, and through the magic of a grace and a loving God who appears in my life in almost every form, I was led to become a student of yoga in the yoga camp, where again, toward graduation, I experienced the ability to float out of my body and observe the experience and the mystery and the magic of releasing and allowing the energy to be in us and flow through us. Shortly after losing my wife and healing from this yoga camp, I left the corporate world and became a late blooming hippie and moved into a commune in California. God, take me, I put my life in your hands. Show me what's the next right thing to do. What I really appreciated and wanted to share with that is that a Native American named Rolling Thunder had come to town to do a presentation. And he stayed in this commune where I was living. And after a week of putting up with this precocious Texan that was kind of a little loudmouth resident, he says, "You could fit in if you would, quit talking." And after a week of practicing silence, he said, "You may come with us on the vision quest." In that vision quest, it was cleansing, healing, climbing up the stream to the mountaintop, and did a sweat lodge. Now, I thought, well, geez, I've been to these steam rooms in the gym, I can handle that. Well, here I am in this Native American experience, and they put us elbow to elbow and start bringing in these hot rocks. How many here have had a sweat lodge experience, and so you understand some of the nature of this? Well, for me, here I am thinking, I can do this, I can take it. And they keep bringing in hot rocks and pouring water on and steam everywhere in the dark. And I'm dying, I'm thinking, oh my God, I know I'm going to die. And they finally open the door and bring in more hot rocks. By this time, it's not that I wasn't afraid to die, I was willing. Please let me die. I've had enough. God, I want to go. Then they passed the talking stick around, and when it came to me, I was invited to call on my spirit guides to show me the next right thing, and to my grandfathers. And in that moment, I found myself feeling wrapped in the arms of what I thought was a giant bird or angel. And was like, whoa, it was as mystical as on the table in the car wreck, out of my body into this being of light. They let us out of the sweat lodge, laying on the ground after dipping in the cold stream. I literally floated out of my body and looked down and saw me again and looked up and saw this form, this angel form. And because, it became my medicine shield, which is now tattooed on my chest. To spare you the ugliness of my hairy chest, this is my medicine shield. My life story was told according to this Native American, and that as a human caught up in the earth with the flames of pain and confusion, I tried to find peace in the serpent energy. As a young man, I was Machete Eddie collecting snakes to earn extra money because I would sell them to the zoo in Houston. And so I was the snake man. But it was after the death experience and learning the idea of the pyramid, to find the light within, that I was able to open my wings and change my life experience. That was my transformative experience in the sweat lodge. Now, I'm dancing back and forth in a number of ways, but I just wanted to give you some insight in the fact that we can have spiritually transformative experiences in a multitude of ways. It was after I had come back from studies in India where my teacher says, go back into your world and serve others, not yourself. I ended up as an orderly in a nursing home, started a home health agency, got very involved in community outreach and hospice. And then I fell off the path, so to speak, got angry with God, ended up caught up in drugs, alcohol, fast cars, and loose women. That kept me into the dredges of despair and disillusionment. However, I was brought back to the basis of the most significant foundation in how we can experience what the near-death experience is like. And that is through the power of meditation. And I'll have to quote a bumper sticker that really drives it home. Meditation is not what you think. Okay? And the challenge has been for me, who has a degree in logic and physics, to always want to analyze and describe, is to recognize that our mind is a great tool and a terrible master. Let's enjoy those experiences between thoughts. And meditation is a way of reaching that place and that point. And it's a skill that is developed with practice. 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 The experience that really brought me and started this all off was driving home from a football game in Atlanta, Georgia, in my red Firebird convertible. I had been out to a football game, I'd been drinking, car came swerving down the road, and I pulled to the side to avoid it. My wheel caught the curb and bam! Something slammed. Stunned the heck out of me. It's sort of like you ever hit behind by a swinging door and you would boom. Well, I heard that bam and stunned, and finally I'm trying to figure out what happened. And I find myself floating almost 2 stories above the scene of this car crashed into a tree. And then I said, man, that looks like my car. Damn. People running out the door. And then I said, that's my body. If that's my body, then who am I? The awareness hit me. And as soon as I recognized and got that message, I found myself sucked out of there like a piece of dust up a vacuum hose, cascading through a tunnel into the heavens. Now, I had studied navigation while I was in the Navy, and I knew my way around the stars. But this took me far beyond this galaxy, into the cosmos. And as I continued to reach out, trying to grok this, to put my arms around it, I found myself finally approaching a bright light. And then I was surrounded with it. If you can ever remember coming out of a movie theater in the middle of the day, your eyes have been so adjusted, and you come out into this bright white light and it kind of dazzles you. Well, that's only an inkling of the kind of brightness. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was so nourishing. It was like when I was marching home in the freezing rain and finally able to go into a bathtub and get warm release. If you can imagine, and take a deep breath with me. Being wrapped into this nourishing white light and love was like, whoa, this is it. Then I started questioning. And as I would ask and pose questions in my mind, answers would appear to me. This is often described as the cosmic Akashic records, if you would. And I remember walking into the Library of Congress here in our capital. And you walk into this giant domed room with books everywhere. Well, this experience felt like I was in this giant dome cave. And anytime I would want to know any question, like, you know, the explanation of how did Pythagoras come up with his theorems, or why was I born into this family I was born into, or, you know, is there really a God? No matter what the question was, as soon as I would pose it and experience it, it was like the answer was clearly apparent. I've talked with many other near-death experiences who say, yes, we get those answers. Dang it, I wish we could bring them back. Having satisfied myself with every question I ever could come up with, and there were a lot of them, you know, from my experiences in military and elsewhere, I was like, cool. Then a figure started to solidify in front of me. And I love Star Trek and transporter room figures, because if you can imagine the bubbles, and here comes this image, and finally it all comes together, and there, standing in front of me, is the image of he who I used to pray to as an altar boy. What I believed to be Jesus was this man standing there with a grin on his face and a love in his eyes, reaching out to me and says, you made it. We're here. You're loved. And I was like, whoa, for real? And the love that washed over me at that time just was greater than any other experience I've been able to experience here on earth. And as I drenched it in, I heard the command from him with a hand pointing up to his left, saying, we're here for you. And I know he wanted me to look where he was pointing, but I couldn't turn away from the love in his eyes. And he says, we're here. This is where you are. And I look up there, and there was this figure, a grandfather, Godfather, Father God himself. And this God, as I understand God, sat there with a big grin on his face, patting his left thigh and saying, come on, it's your turn, come on. And if you've ever been through or seen a little child who Santa Claus says it's your time and back away, it was that moment when I looked up, me? You can't mean me. And God waved his hands and patted his leg. And this was the first opportunity I had to become self-conscious. By that I mean I was so focused on what was happening out there in front of me. I wasn't aware or thought about who I am or what am I, why. But no sooner did I become self-conscious and start to back away, then whap, I'm in his lap. And if you can imagine sitting there, and I know you've probably experienced it with a child who sits with you and gives you this loving appreciation. And here I am looking into the eyes of God, and he's looking down at me, and he's saying, this is where you always are, if you could only remember it. We are always in the heart, in the mind, in the lap of God. Even when our minds and our ideas are caught up in this physical manifestation we call life on earth, that part of us that is at our core is there. And here I'm sitting in his lap looking up, it's like, whoa, awesome. And he waves his hands at his feet and he says, are you through? And I'm saying, through? And he looks, he's pointing down, and I don't want to look away from his eyes, but he's pointing at his feet. And so as I lean over and look down, it's as if I had my old photo album. You ever picked it up and opened and all the pages scattered out? As I looked down at my feet, here were images of all the memories of my life. What is often called a life review. And for me, I'm looking down, and I'm looking back, and then I'm looking down. Oh, I was a little boy who used to steal Coke bottles from the neighbor's garage. Not only did I notice it, I relived it. In that moment, I recall the mustiness in that garage. I recalled holding onto the bottle, sneaking down the alley. I recalled every moment of getting to the end of it saying, thank God nobody saw me. And after recalling that experience, I looked up with, oh no, you were there. That's bad. And he kind of grinned and he says, well, it's neither good nor bad in the greater sense, but it's a lesson for the learning. Are you through? And it was like, I'm like, wait a minute. I grew up in church where they told me you were a vengeful God. And you're saying, you're okay with that? And he says, it's neither bad nor good in the higher sense. It's a lesson for you. And it was like, took me a number of moments. In God's time, how long is a moment? We don't know, but it was like, oh, really? Okay. And I looked back down, and and as a young man, I would tease in the 4th grade the girl who sat behind me because she spoke with a lisp. And I wanted to be like the other guys in the room, and so I would tease her about, aren't you sorry? I remember acting this way. I remember watching her feel such remorse. I remember me looking to my buddies to say, I'm cool, aren't I? And then I got to feel what I made her experience. I not only felt what I had created in her, I got to observe how she went home and teased her cat. How my behavior had implications and reverberations beyond the moment. How everything we think, say, and do has its consequences. And I've completed this recall in the cat, and all of a sudden it was, oh God, that was really bad. And he said, it's what you people do. It's neither bad nor good in the higher sense, but it is something of which you are responsible. I saved a girl's life in high school. She was drowning out on the beach where I grew up in Freeport, Lake Jackson. I recalled going out to this girl and bringing her in, doing CPR. I even tasted the sea water that she regurgitated in my mouth and face. And when I brought her back to life, I remember the people patting me on the back, and I remember walking down the beach thinking, wow, I should get a merit badge for this. I wish I hadn't been playing hooky. But I turned to God with, well, hey, that one was a good one, right? And he nodded, and he says, well, it's neither good nor bad in the higher sense. It's a lesson for the learning. Are you through? And it's like, whoa. And I got to go through every event that I'm either proud of or ashamed of or don't want anybody to know about. And it's all there recorded in our personal copy of the Akashic records. And I was even to the point, you know, that yes, I succeeded, and I thought I was proud of the accomplishments I'd made. And he says, it's what you've done for others, not what you've done for yourself. It's neither good nor bad in the higher sense. You know. And so I was saying, am I through? And he even pointed out, you know, I had fudged on that expense account the week before. I mean, I was only getting salary and I was working 60 hours a week, so I deserved more than that. And it was like, by this time, bad consequences. You choose. Are you through? And I looked into his eyes and into his heart, and I says, am I through? There's no way I want to go back. Yes, I'm through with that. And he was nodding. Let me close this book. Make sure Mom knows I'm happy and fine. Send her a message not to worry about me. And as I reached out to close that down, I came to in my body 2 weeks later out of a coma in the hospital. Now, I had, you know, crashed the car into a tree, steering wheel through the chest, scalped my brain, ruptured my intestines, and was a lifeless, bloody bag of bones when they brought me in. And I asked the doctor, he says, I used to drive ambulance, you know, why would you do that? He kind of grinned. He says, well, it was a slow day. We had an intern. We gave him your body for an exercise. So I say, I'm a living approval for having academic exercises. That experience and working my way back into living in this life, in this world, was hard to match up. First of all, when I tried to explain that to my other doctors and friends, they trying to convince me it was hallucinations, drug-induced, you know, it doesn't fit. So I went to my minister. You know, by this time, you know, I am I'm working, you know, as an adult leader in the Episcopal group. And my minister said, must have been the work of the devil. I won't talk about it. And over, the near-death experiencers find it very difficult to talk about this mystical, dramatic, powerful experience to others who want to have it but don't know where to put it in their own reality. From this auto wreck, I came back, married the lady of my dreams, and proceeded to come back to Austin and go to grad school, and found a job selling network services to the oil company and NASA in Houston for General Electric. So I was peddling internet services before they even called it that. My wife and I took a delayed vacation to go sailing in Corpus Christi Bay. And it was in that outing, as we were sitting under the stars, watching shooting stars. She was at the helm. I was in the bow of this little 16-foot skiff. And if you know what a jibe is, I was up front and the wind shifted. She got hit in the head by the boom and knocked in the water. When I tried to bring it to the surface, I couldn't. I came up with such anger at God. How could this happen? Not her, me. I'm okay. And that loss was a spiritually transformative experience as well. I share that with you because I would like to invite you to look into your own life and recognize that the challenges, the disappointments, the grief is just as great a gift as the peace. And I've come to work as many ways as I can to facilitate grief. One of my mentors, Ram Dass, taught me to start it. Good grief and gracious death. Grief shared is grief released and healed. And as we finish sharing our grief, we become whole in helping others through that. It was shortly after her death that I folded up, gave my house to my sister, put a camper on my pickup and moved out to the commune in California. Before I moved out there, I'm jumping ahead, visiting my cousins in their home in Sausalito. Well, actually they're in Tiburon, San Francisco Bay. There was a big party and they're all celebrating it. Hey, Cousin Eddie is here. And for from sunrise to sunset for 3 days, there was ongoing parties. On the third day, I remember all these people in banquets and food in the house, and I was ready for a little peace and quiet, still in my bathing suit. So I walk out of the house, go down past the bushes to the pool where there's a slide going down. And I decide to take a moment. And I'm at the top of the slide and I sit back and I repeat to myself what we learned in the Navy, how to bury at sea. We commit this body unto you, O Lord, into the sea. As I laid back and started sliding down head first, I reached the end of the slide and had this momentary thought. Did they let the water out? As I turned that way, it snapped my head and I hit the water and sank to the bottom. And I floated out of my body. Now, there was a movie, Out on a Limb, in which, what's her name? Shirley MacLaine showed this vision of how she floated out of this hot tub. Well, here I was, watching my body at the bottom of the pool, floating, and then I could see the house, cars out in front of the house. I thought, this is cool. And next thing I know, I'm watching the whole San Francisco Bay, and I'm seeing the curvature of the earth, and I keep floating. Instead of going into the light, I backed my way in. And I watched the whole earth recede away, observing the energies that flow around the earth and the sun sending motion and love, and watching all of that transpire. And then pretty soon I find myself and I'm back in that white light again. Ah, it's still here. And as I turn around and I realize, up comes this figure, and it's my grandfather, my father's father, who had died 5 years earlier. And he's looking as young and as healthy as the day he'd gotten off the train to come visit me when I was a child in Houston. And he walks up and he says, Eddie, my boy, so good to see you. Grandpa. And he grabs me and he says, no, I want you to give your father a message. Okay. I want you to tell him to quit taking life so seriously. And it was like, oh. Well, I do what he does. Maybe that's a message for me as well. Yes, I will. And he held me until I said, good, okay, you can go now. And he let me go. And I'm here in this light, and I'm feeling at home and listening to the music. enjoying all of the multi-sensory saturating lusciousness of the light. And then this figure starts to form again. And sure enough, it's my wife Gloria. And she was there looking as radiantly beautiful as the day she walked down the aisle to marry me. She was there in her angelic glory. And she came to me and she held her arms out. And I ran up to her and I said, "Oh, Gloria, Gloria, I'm so glad to see you. I'm so sorry I failed you." And she just held me. And then she pushed me back and looked me right in my eyes. And she says, "You've got to let me go." "But no, you don't understand. That was Mom. I mean, I'm dying. I can't sleep at night." "No, no." She says, "Your grief is holding me back. You and your anger with God taints all of us. You did what you could, and what's past is past. Forgive yourself and accept the forgiveness of our Creator. And let me be." And I remember like a baby not wanting to be held. It was like, "No, you don't but that means I can't, you really mean I gotta let go of, but I heard," and it was a moment that must have lasted a lifetime. And after I'd quit wriggling and screaming and squirreling, she says, "Let me go. It is what it's meant to be. And I am happy and have great opportunities. Let me go." And she wouldn't, and she's holding me and staring me right in the eyes and penetrating my heart with, "Your grief is not good for me or you. Let it go." And when I finally says, "You're right, you're right. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Thank you. I love you." And she says, "Okay, you got it. Yeah, good." She grabs me, turns me around, puts her arm around me. "Now, is that any way to leave your family with that body in the pool?" And I look at my body, and I look at her. I look back down there. Damn, I hate it when you're right. And no sooner did I say that than pow, some force threw me on the edge of the pool, and I rolled over coughing up blood and water as my cousins came out of the house up above hollering, "Where are you? What's happening?" They picked me up and I was stunned, and I kind of went to bed, and it was only weeks later in counseling and others that it became clear to me what had happened with this drowning experience. These are the kinds of near-death or spiritually transforming experiences that I've had the pleasure or challenge to experience. And I would like to kind of open it up for a moment for us to recognize how connected we are and how much at one we are. First of all, I'd like you to show how many here have actually had spiritually transformative experiences. If you realize and look into it, birth of a child, graduation, waking up in the morning is a spiritual experience for many of us. The near-death experience is a subset of that universal opportunity to transform our lives spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically by a process that I've come to call meditation. Again, meditation is the key. And here I am, having found a teachings in yoga and others, and it took me 7 years to get to visit the master in India. Finally, I'm there at his ashram, and it's my time for personal stories. And he brings me up and I said, Master, I had this experience that brought me to the path. And he said, tell me about it. And so I told him about dying and this and that. And I asked, well, what do you think about it? And he says, well, dying, I do that every day. That is what our Master Jesus and others keep teaching us. To die daily is to take time to still our minds and to go in between thoughts to experience the presence of a radiant, loving source of our being. How are we doing on time, Bob?
About 5 more minutes.
Any particular requests?
Would you tell us about the third one, the third near-death experience?
Near-death experience on the operating table.
Right. In other words, the outcome of what happened when you drowned.
Having drowned in my cousin's pool, I came back to Austin, where I'd had a house with a friend, and there was some water in my lung, and it kept impacting and compacting, and eventually I had to have lung surgery. Let me digress for a moment and go back to the fact that as a young child growing up in Panama, I was known as Machete Eddie because I was so comfortable with swords and with machetes. I would go out and we'd chop down big bamboos. In junior high, I was the one who would cut down big oaks and build forts and whatnot. When I got to the Naval Academy, they would put us through all these different sports. And they put me in the fencing for 3 days. And the coach was so amazed at my natural ability with the swords, he insisted I join their club. We have to understand this. I was a young macho man, and that was too effeminate for me, so I never accepted that. However, I've always been gifted with the use of a knife and a blade. Well, here I am. I'm rolled into the operating room in Brackenridge because they're going to have to go in and take out this collapsed lung. And as I'm laying on the table, they're trying to put an air hose down, and of course, if you're familiar with a tracheotomy is, they'd had to cut my throat open to put a breathing tube in previous surgeries. As they're trying to put this thing through my throat, I'm gagging with but I've had so much Novocaine, I couldn't move a muscle or even signal anything. I wasn't unconscious. I was aware and immobilized as they were. Felt like they cut my neck open. Then I went unconscious. And sometime later, I find myself looking down inside the operating room to this body twisted open on the operating table, spreading the ribs, taking out body parts. A bloody mess. And then I'm looking down, geez, if that's me, what's that like? And I ask myself, and I look back up, and I'm witnessing myself witnessing myself. And in this case, if you've ever put on a mask to look like, I don't care, Halloween, whatever, you're pretending, you put on a different mask, and you go to the mirror to look in, what do I look like? And I'm looking at me up there, and here's a short, squatty warrior, all decked out, and all of a sudden I have a total recall of being one of Hannibal's forward swordsmen, gifted at the ability to disembowel or kill enemies, and I was a hero for doing that. I recall that with clarity, like I can recall graduating from college. And then I'm in my body looking at me, and then I'm looking at me looking at my body, and think, oh my God, is that what karma is? No sooner did I say that, then the surgeon throws a sheet over my body, And he and the anesthesiologist start walking out the door, arguing about whose fault it was. I can quote to the fact that the surgeon hollered at the anesthesiologist, "You really screwed that one up." And the anesthesiologist screamed, "I'll be GD if I'm going to take the blame for this one. You did it. You effed it up." At that moment, my body jerked. A pole fell over, and they looked at each. "Oh, he's back." And they moved in and started working on me, and I went unconscious. And when I came to, it was 2 days later in recovery room. And I can remember so well when the two doctors were making rounds, they came in to see me. And I said, "Gentlemen, tell me about what was going on with you guys when you threw the sheet over me." They looked at each other, and so I explained to them verbatim what I had observed. And they looked at each other. "Never happened. Drugs, you know. Don't tell anybody, you'll throw you in the loony bin." And I never saw them again until a few years later at the American Medical Association, when Dr. Kirksey remembered me but didn't remember the event. And I had at one time, when I told this experience a few years ago, a woman said, "I was a nurse in there. I remember that. I remember you." That was my near-death experience on an operating table. I don't know why I've been gifted with the opportunity to have multiple transformative experiences. But I am aware that I am committed to share my experience, my insights and understandings, and to encourage everyone here to learn to die daily in meditation, so it's not a trauma when you finally get to leave your body for good. That's why I've been dedicated, and Cheryl and I are now committed to enhancing how we do death and dying in our communities. That's why we work with hospice, why we're funeral directors, and why we're speaking to you today. With that said, I would like to take a few moments, invite you also to come back with a moment to get comfortable so we can do a visualization of what it might be for yourself to have a near-death experience. But before we go into that, I'm going to open it up for any questions or comments about what I've shared with you so far. Yes, sir.
Hi. When you had that white sheet over you in the hospital,
Yes, sir.
did you have an out-of-body experience then?
When they threw that sheet over my body, I was observing it from above. So yes, I was not in that body that they covered. I was witnessing from another place in space and time.
Then, when you ended back in your body, how did, just kind of ballpark it, how did the experience transform itself into memories? You were the best guess on that one.
How experiences become memories.
You're out of your body, and you're separated from your body. You come back in, you brought that experience with you and built memories out of it. And I'm kind of a scientific thinking like you are too, so.
I understand, and that's one of the mysteries of cosmology, and I'm sure we can come up with a number of very good explanations of a phenomena, but I've come to realize that explanations are a booby prize. Here I am teaching yoga in this commune, and there is this one guy keeps showing up from over the hill, and they say, that's Fritz. And he started asking me questions, and then pretty soon I know his name is Fritz Capra, and the Tao of Physics. And I'm saying, well, if he knows that, then I've got to explain or ask him if my explanation is accurate. So when he came back to class, and after class I said, could we talk? I says, you know, I've come to understand that there's a difference in what we see in rainbows. because when you're observing it from this point, you're noticing it from this fraction of angle, and someone else is at another place. They've got a different angle, so they've got a different wave pattern they're looking into. And I went into details, and then I started talking about how adenosine diphosphate translates to adenosine triphosphate, how energy from sun becomes energy in plants. And he says, very, very good. And I said, well, thank you. I've been wanting to verify and corroborate that. And he said, well, now that you understand it, does it make it any less enjoyable? And I was realizing, if I'm so busy analyzing what I'm seeing in a rainbow, I'm holding back from the experience of it. And when you ask the memory versus the experience, I believe the essence of who we are, our soul, registers. Like I said, in this memory of all of the things I had done, all of the feelings I had, all the pride and shame, they're registered within our essence, our soul. And it is after we can become still that we realize those are experiences for enlightenment and our understanding, but they are not the definition of who we are. Matt, you had a question.
Yeah, I'm curious in your first near-death experience when you said kind of close the book and you had that thought about your mother.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that that thought is what brought you back down? The love for your mother, or you would have not maybe come back?
Absolutely. Time and again, as I've worked and shared near-death experiences over the decades, I first got introduced to this organization called IANDS. And IANDS, the Association of Near-Death Studies, is something that many of us are active with. And Ken Ring came to town in Seattle, and we started working there. And as I've talked to hundreds of people, I've come to recognize it is our attachments that bring us back. My favorite example, because people say, well, what happens when you die? And from my experience, I was gone for 2 weeks. Here's a young man I met in Seattle. He was working on the third, fourth story, building and construction, and a big steel beam hit him in the head and knocked him off the building. And as he went tumbling down, he was out of his body, watching his body fall. And then he got to see his life review. And there was his children at home. And he made a decision, I can't leave those kids. And the next thing you know, he hit this awning and bounced back, came to, and was stunned and went off to the hospital. So he had a whole life review in those few moments from when he got hit to when he bounced off there. And for me, it was many weeks. And I've had some people, especially in my hospice care, I remember in San Diego, a gentleman had gone into a coma. And it was a good 6 weeks. Nothing. People were waiting. They wanted to, what's going to happen. And I can remember the daughter came in and says, we can't get into Dad's lockbox. All of his wills and everything is there. We don't know what we're going to do. One night, and like I said, this is months in, and I was, I had an agency and we'd rotate, and I was sitting there filling out papers, and I heard him start to rumble. Mr. Z? He says, oh, I couldn't go. The key is in my fishing box. And he died the next morning. Out of a coma, some attachments. And I love this, Chuck Myers I worked with at the hospital here and bringing hospice to the communities. And Chuck always talked about how, we really choose when we leave. at one level or another. And he says, time and again, he's saying someone that's not expected to make it through the night is alive 3 days later because the grandchild finally arrived from South Africa. And then someone who's looking very healthy, when he finds out mother-in-law just got off the plane and he's died before she gets there. These experiences have shown me that we consciously choose at one level or another how to participate in the experience of life on earth, life in this body. And what you see here is just a vessel, a body that I happen to have been issued by our Creator in order to experience and to share our experience, insights, understandings, to love one another. There is where the power in the underlying lesson is. Yes, ma'am.
How do you feel about the Hemlock Society, you know, ending your, if you have a terminal disease going on and ending your life before it actually happens?
Choices in dying.
Yes, choices in dying, that's right.
I was actually on the Hemlock Board of Directors for a while. And I did that because I wanted to have, and I've been an active member of the, Funeral Consumers Guide. That's really what got me into becoming a funeral director, was how do you change the industry? Well, you had to get a license to really be effective. But there is lessons about choosing to die. Does anyone here remember Helen Nearing, Paul and Helen Nearing? They were back in the 70s. They were the do-it-yourself gurus. They built their own home out of stone. They lived off the grid. They were do-it-yourselfers. Well, it came to the point they found they both were in terminal, end-of-life choices. And so they very visibly said, okay, I'm choosing to abstain from any nutrition and hydration. And by choosing, our body will start to generate its own endorphins. I can't tell you how many times I've had to struggle with doctors when I was a medical representative, that we can choose how to die. And Hemlock, yes, it gives you a chance to have control over your own end of life. But my hope is that we can teach each other that there are easier, better ways than putting a plastic bag over your head and pulling the strings. That's often a tangent. Another question. Wow, yes?
I think this is on the subject, but I have two things that go through my mind from time to time. The one of them is the American Airlines flight that dropped an engine 300 feet off the ground in Chicago. And the last words of the pilot was, "Oh, damn." And the other picture is one of the men that came out of the 108th floor of the World Trade Center, upside down, all the way down. What happens to those people?
Could you repeat your thing for the video?
Yeah, Robert is telling me about what happens, well, one, an airplane experience where it dropped an engine and the pilot's words were, "Oh, damn," as well as someone falling from the towers when they burned, 100. What I understand is that each of us has our own destiny, our own opportunities, and our own challenges. And we will meet the end of our incarnation in this body in a number of ways, depending upon how we have, made choices along the way. And when I hear of people, and I remember talking to one of the near-death folks who was there next to the tower looking at all these hundreds of bodies that had impacted the ground, and watching, they saw the spirits floating away from many of them. And a number of the spirits were still not aware that they had died, and they were trying to pick up their own dead carcass. There is an opportunity to become aware that we are not this body, We are not this life story, though that is part of our experience in this world. It is our opportunity, our choice. Like as God said when I was in his lap, are you through? It's neither good nor bad in the higher sense. There are consequences for every choice you make, every act you take. And to the degree that you choose the highest good for all involved, you become more and more free to die with comfort and ease. Or, in my meditations, sporadically I'll find myself floating into another dimension. But when I try to make an intention of being an out-of-body traveler, I can also get distracted and there's discomfort in my physical form. One more question. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to hear what you say about people that have lived, say, not such pristine lives, such as Daniel Brinkley, and the outcome of his dying in this lifetime.
Cheryl is bringing up a story of a gentleman I know who was a professional assassin in Vietnam, blowing up whole villages. And he was struck by lightning, had a near-death experience, was in the presence of God, got to review his life, and has come back. And we all sometimes miss the mark. I've worked with some people in prisons, you know, and in veteran hospitals who still hang on to their shame and anger or grief, and that seems to hold them back from the light and love of God.
However, what about Daniel's experience when he came back?
Well, you're speaking when Daniel was asked by someone.
He said, where does he go? Where did he go?
Yeah.
Because he had lived such a horrible life.
You know, if I can go to heaven, anybody can, is what he said. And I love the fact, or the part where someone asked him, said, well, when you're there with God, what do you talk? You know, what do you say about all that assassinations and things you were doing? Daniel said, well, I wasn't going to bring it up if he didn't. So that's an example of the fact that, you know, we get to experience and allow the presence and grace of God in our lives. At this point, I'm going to invite everyone who's accepting to join me in a guided visualization. If you have any reservations or objections, speak up and let me know now, because what I'm going to ask is we can turn down the lights in this room, and I will guide you through a little breathing, imagining, asking you to take note, and then bring you back and open it up for a few comments and discussions before we close for the evening.
And how long is it going to be?
10, 12 minutes at the most. As long as my bladder can hold it, that's fine. With that said, if we may, thank you. Find yourself in a comfortable place. Sit with support. Relax, put your anything in your lap you can put on the floor, so that you find yourself totally comfortable and relaxed. Now, I'm going to use my chimes because they are a tool that sends an audio signal that helps me tune in to listen, because our mind will look for something to focus on. Some spot in the room, some thought in our minds. But if we keep going back to just focusing on the breath, I invite you now to take a deep, deep breath in and release. And again, deep breath in, release. One more deep breath in, release. and follow. See if you can detect the waves of sound coming to you. See yourself floating above your body. Imagine you're lifted up and out into a radiant white light. Feel that white light. Breathe it in. Let it soak into every pore as you release all tensions and concerns. And imagine you're looking at a storyline of your life. See those moments of true joy and delight, and realize they are gifts from your core self. Breathe in and release again. See those challenges, those tragedies, those disappointments in your life. Give thanks and forgiveness for any negative energy you hold about those experiences. Look at your life in its panoramic form. Neither good nor bad in a higher sense. They're lessons to learn and serve others with grace and peace. Imagine you are here in the lap of God, with arms embracing, love flowing. Know you are God's child, loved and appreciated for everything you are. Knowing this, take note of relationships, attachments that you have with this world, this life, this experience of now. Noticing these people, these experiences. Imagine you have a tablet in which you are writing notes to self. Forgive, love, and serve those who stand out in your vision. Breathe in, release, and prepare to come back to the room. Breathe deep again and return to now. And we can have light from the cosmos and the ceiling above. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who would share with me something surprising or significant about that process? Yeah.
As I was doing my life's review, I just saw my sins. It was hard to see
Sins
any
or shortcomings.
I saw them as sins.
And I understand sin is simply to miss the mark. And as I have, looked at the things for which I am not only am I not proud of it, I have been ashamed of it. I have been fearful of acknowledging it. And yet I'm thankful to the 12-step recovery programs and how when we inventory our life and we communicate to others, making amends. The greatest challenge I have is making amends to that guy in the mirror. And I think I'm not alone. We all get caught up on, if I was only good enough. You are. You are a radiantly beautiful child of God. And I am thankful and greatly appreciative to have shared this time with you tonight. Namaste, y'all.
Namaste.
That completes our gathering tonight. I would encourage you let me encourage you that if you don't at least become a member, do donate to the organization, since they do work hard to keep the lights on and make this experience available to all of us. Safe travels. Know God loves you. Good night.
Thanks. So if everybody wants to stick around, we'll...
Yeah, we'll hang out with y'all for a while. Thank you, Bob, for making this happen. And give Bob a hand for all of this research.
I just wanted to ask if there's anyone here who had an OBE that could tell us, I mean, a near-death experience that could tell us about. Anyone in the audience that did?
Who's ready? Cheryl has got lots of them.
I have 3 of them. My most recent one was...
You want to get up here so they can see you?
Okay. Yeah, my most recent near-death was 20 years ago. It doesn't seem that long ago because it's like time just has really speeded up since then, and time is not the same that it used to be. But I'm a chiropractor, and I had gone out to Hawaii for a conference with Global Relationship Centers. I was studying to be a facilitator, and if any of you know what EST is, it's a type of psychology, Adlerian psychology. And I've been doing it for several years. And so I had gone out to Hawaii and had attended this conference. And then later after that, I stayed because I wanted to see if Hawaii was where I wanted to put a clinic. And I did have a boyfriend that was out there. And we were looking at swimming with dolphins. It was very cold though, it was March, and so the dolphins would not come in. We had a really sunny day one day, and we decided that we would go kayaking. This was the island of Oahu, and we kayaked off of Lanikai Beach, which is a very beautiful beach, and there are these little islands off Lanikai Beach. And we decided that we would kayak out to the far island and cliff climb. Mind you, we were in our bathing suits and our little water shoes, and we kayaked out to this far island. It's approximately 2 miles out. So we had been cliff climbing for several hours, and we did not have any equipment. We were just taking handholds and toe holds on the cliffside. It was not like there was a trail. We were climbing up the cliffs, and we had gotten around to the ocean side, and by this time we were really very hot and very tired, and we had come to a place that we were about 180 feet up on the cliffside, and there was what I would call an active or live tide pool that high up. And it was quite large. It was probably as long as from where I am to the end of that second room, so as wide as this building, and maybe as wide this way. And it, we realized that we could not go up or down. We were going to have to go through the tide pool to get to the other side if we were going to keep climbing. And so by this time the waves were getting kind of big, and they were coming in from two different directions and hitting the sides of the cliff and coming up and feeding this tide pool. So you know the waves are really high. But we thought, well, we'd just count the waves because there was a little lull in between. So we figured about every fifth wave we might have time to get across the tide pool. And so I started across the tide pool, and I actually got to the other side. And when I got to the other side, I realized that that whole cliff in front of me was slick and wet, and there was a little perch about this big that I could reach up and put myself on. And I turned around, and here was the ocean in front of me. And I think I was a little bit hypnotized by these waves that were coming in. And I had gotten a picture of my friend just before that, and the waves were coming in. It was so high, I had a picture of the water coming down on him like a waterfall. And it was feeding this tide pool and going over the side as a waterfall.
So what happened?
And what happened was I just sat there for a little bit, and then I heard my friend, who now was on the other side of the tide pool. He had not crossed with me. And he said, "You've got to come back. The tide's coming in." And it hit me all of a sudden that the waves were already too big. And I wasn't going to get back. I mean, I had that feeling in like you get in your heart when something grabs it and twists it, like that real fear of, you know, and you know you're in a terrible spot. And so we waited until it was about as clear as we could see it, but the waves were huge. And I made it back to where he was. He grabbed a hold of me. He pushed me up against the cliff. And by this time, I've got the cliff smack in my face, and he's behind me, pushing into the cliff. And he says, "Hang on, a big one's coming." And literally, when those waves came together from two different directions, they came with such force that they literally sucked me out from underneath him. And they tell me I was sucked into a blowhole. And I found myself in a place that had no bottom and no top. You know, as a kid, you practice swimming underwater and holding your breath. And I thought I was pretty good at it. At one time, I got up to about 3 minutes. And I tell you, I held my breath as long as I could. But where I was, the water was smacking me against the lava rock and the coral. And I just, after a while, I just had to become one with the water. But there was no other way. I always thought drowning would be a horrible death. It was not. As I breathed in that water, I became one with the ocean. And then I could see my body. I was no longer in my body. I could see my body. And my body was just getting ripped and torn. I was like curled up in a little ball, you know, trying to avoid all of the coral and the lava rock. And but I wasn't hurting anymore. I was out of my body. And then everything turned to a light, bright aqua blue. And I wasn't seeing my body anymore. And I was in that space of that light, bright aqua blue. It was so beautiful. And the sounds were, it was like music that you don't hear here. It was the most beautiful place, this just light, bright aqua blue. I could have been there for 1,000,000 years. There was no time. And I knew there was no time. I was in a place of utter lovely beauty, and then all of a sudden I found myself in white light that was supportive. I felt like there was a me, but I don't think there was a me that's like the me here. I could hear the sound. I could see that light. I doubt that I was in a body that actually had eyes or ears, but I could still perceive the beauty and feel the wonderment of where I was. And I have to say that I perceive things in how I feel. I don't see a lot of images, so for me, I was in a very supportive place, and the feeling that I had was very much akin to what a very young child feels when you're in a swing and your mommy or your daddy are pushing you in that swing, and you go up to the height of the swing and you feel this upliftment, like almost like you're going to heaven. I think we kind of remember when we're very small children what it was like to fly. And so I had that same feeling that I had as a very young child, knowing that I could fly. And it was so wonderful. It was like the high hum of the universe. And I was there forever. It was wonderful. There was not a lot of movement. I was just protected. I felt wonderful. And then I thought I heard my friend call my name. And it was just like warp speed from Star Trek, because I thought. And that's kind of what Edward talks about, the attachment. I thought I heard my friend call my name. And it was like warp speed from Star Trek. There was, it was like a swirl, like a big tunnel, and it was filled with, I have to say, kind of dark light, but with beautiful colors that we don't even see here. And there was movement, and there was sound, and I knew I was on my way back. I knew, especially when my heart started back in my chest. It was like, bam, it hit my rib cage, and all of a sudden there was pain. And there was a perception of light. And from the other side, my friend had said that after I had disappeared, he searched everywhere for my body. He said my body was nowhere. He searched, it was very high up, it was about 180 feet up on the cliff. He said I was nowhere on the boulders below. He said I wasn't in the tide pool. I wasn't anywhere. And at first, he said, God, I get it, she's with you. And then all of a sudden he started having these thoughts of, oh my God, they're going to get me for murder. My son had already had words with him, and he got really, self-conscious about, oh my God. he went through all of that feeling of self-consciousness and, what is going to happen? And then he just decided again, God, I get it. She's with you, and I'm going to have a sea rescue of her body. And so he started back around the cliff. Just before he disappeared from where that tide pool was, he said it felt like something grabbed him by both his shoulders and turned him around, and he felt compelled to call my name one last time, and just like that, my body popped up in the tide pool, just like boom. And he said, I was face up at that time. He said, I was just as serene as I could be and just as dead as I could be. He said it's real obvious when someone is gone. And so he came, it took him a while to get back because he had to cliff climb back around. And the tide pool was about 4 feet deep. So by the time he got a hold of me, he was kind of perched on the side of the tide pool, reaching down kind of in a crouching position, and he had grabbed both my hands, and by this time I was face down in the tide pool, and he tried to lift me out, and I was full of water. I was very heavy, and I don't know if you've tried picking somebody up that's drowned, but they are like, I don't know, 2 or 3 times the weight they ever were before. And he pulled me like this, and my chest caught on the lava rock, just like a Heimlich maneuver. And I was definitely back. And then it's not such a pretty picture, because if you've ever seen someone play with a snail and salt it, or a slug and salt it, it turns inside out. And I had all this salt water in me, so it was kind of like a snail turning inside out. Not a pretty sight when somebody is drowned in salt water. But I was back. And I was definitely in shock. And I was saying, in a very cheerful voice, I understand, this has something to do with dolphins. And I had one of these little Kodak cameras attached to my wrist. They came in a very strong band, and it had gone under with me. And by this time, I guess I didn't even realize it, but it was I was ripped to the bone, and that camera was kind of all, it wound up in this flesh and kind of hanging from my arm. And my friend said, and we kept repeating this on the way back, because he couldn't carry me. He had to keep saying, okay, put your hands here, put your feet there. And he said, gee, I wonder what if your camera took a picture while you were gone. And, I remember that clearly, but, you put some things that are said aside, because by the time we got back to the bay side of that island, there were some surfers out there, and they were screaming, oh my God, oh my God. And I could hear him saying, don't tell her what she looks like. And he got both of our kayaks. They said, we've got to have a sea rescue over, we've got to call in the helicopter. He said, no time. He was like on adrenaline. I mean, he tied both of those kayaks together. He threw me in one. He got in the other. He pushed them off. He rowed us both back to shore. He threw me in a car and took me to Castle Medical. When they got there, they called me a classic drowning. And I did not, in Hawaii, get any kind of negative reaction like people get from doctors here. First of all, it was the beginning of some really far out magical stuff. The woman that did triage had drowned from that very island, that very cliffside, 20 years before. She was in a wheelchair still, and didn't have the use of one of her sides, her leg or her arm. But I was the first person in 20 years that had come back alive. And so she was just in awe of the fact that I had come back. I spent that time in the hospital where they picked, stuff out of all these wounds. I had I had crushed an artery in my leg, and so it was about that much crushed, so they didn't sew it back together. They had me keep it elevated, and they told me I couldn't fly, so I had to stay out in Hawaii for a whole month to heal. But the interesting thing was, while I was out there, and the doctors all wanted to know who I saw on the other side. I mean, it was not like here in the States, because they have so many accounts out there of people being saved by dolphins or sharks.
Who did you see?
Well, I have a picture, and I don't know. Do you have her?
From the camera?
Yes.
Oh, yes, my God.
I didn't develop the pictures for a whole 6 weeks after the incident because I was really damaged. Then I developed the film, and then it was oh my God, I'm going to be the weird doctor on the block. What am I going to do with this, because I can't deny it now. At first when I was seeing her, I saw her as a banshee. I saw her as a banshee because she doesn't look quite human. Her eyes are much larger, and they're all black, okay? And she's reaching across. You can see her hand like this, reaching across for me. And she has very high cheekbones and very prominent lips. And once you see her in that picture, it's like, oh my gosh, there she is.
And who is she?
They tell me in Hawaii, my friends out in Hawaii told me it was Pele's sister, that she always brings people back from drowning. A lot of people see her as a shark. I mean, there's a whole mythology about her. And so now I get to have my own little angel.
Shall we give Cheryl a hand?
And by the way, that's how I met Edward. Because I was sent to him as a counselor. Sure. And we've been together for the past 20 years.
Wow.